Hello everyone. Before we start, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. That's how YouTube keeps sending you stories like this. And now, let's get into it. It was mid-June 2017, and the desert heat hadn't let up even after dark. I'd been driving close to 14 hours that day, hauling pallets of packaged food from Fresno down toward the distribution center in Las Vegas. I didn't have enough left in me to make it all the way, so I stopped for the night in Barstow. I'd pulled off I-15 and found a cheap spot, the Desert Star Inn, one of those older roadside motels with faded signs and a cracked parking lot that had probably looked the same since the 80s. The kind of place that's fine when you're too tired to care. I parked my rig in the far lot, away from the main building, where a few other trucks were lined up against a chain-link fence that ran along the back edge. Beyond that fence was just dirt and scrub, the kind of dry nothingness you get out there in the Mojave. I backed up close enough that the sleeper window looked right out over the fence, killed the engine, logged my hours, and stepped out. The heat was still heavy, even though it was past 10 at night. The air smelled like hot asphalt and dust. I checked the doors, tugged on the handles to make sure everything was locked, and took my duffel to the office. The lobby was small, yellowish light from a buzzing fluorescent overhead, a plastic plant on the counter. The woman behind the desk barely looked up when I gave her my card. The room key was one of those old metal ones with a big plastic tag. She told me to park around back and take the outside stairs to the second floor. I said I already had a spot and didn't need help. I didn't think much about anything then, just wanted a shower, maybe a soda, and a bed. The room was what you'd expect for $50. Carpet that smelled faintly of mildew, a humming air conditioner that blew more noise than cold, and a bathroom mirror spotted from age. But the bed was clean and that's all I cared about. I took a quick shower, watched a few minutes of some crime show on the TV, then crashed. I remember how quiet it was. That kind of motel quiet where you can hear the faint hum of trucks on the freeway in the distance and the occasional door slam somewhere down the row. That's the kind of sound I usually fall asleep to. I woke up once around midnight. No sound woke me. Just that half-awake feeling when your body's still catching up from the road. The air conditioner had clicked off. It was too warm, so I got up, adjusted the vent, drank some water, and looked out the window toward the parking lot. My rig sat under a street lamp at the far end, silver under the yellow light. Everything looked still. I went back to bed. Maybe an hour later I heard a knock. Not loud, just enough to pull me out of sleep. Came from outside. Not the motel door, but the familiar hollow thud of someone knocking on a truck cab. At first I thought it wasn't mine. Maybe someone else's rig nearby. But then I heard a man's voice. Not shouting, just talking close. "Hey, your rear lights are on." It was distant enough that it didn't seem like he was talking to me directly, but it felt off. I pulled myself up, went to the window, and looked out. The parking lot was still mostly empty. The only light came from that lamp near my truck, and the blue glow from the motel's vending machine. I spotted movement. Someone standing near the back of my rig. A man in a dark hoodie, hands in his pockets, looking toward the trailer. I couldn't see his face clearly. The hood cast a shadow over it. He didn't seem to be doing anything, just standing there. I hesitated a second, wondering if maybe my taillights really were on. I'd had electrical issues before, lights that flickered if a relay was loose. But I didn't feel like walking down there barefoot in the middle of the night. I figured I'd deal with it in the morning. So I opened the window a crack and said, "Thanks, I'll check it later." He didn't respond. Just stood there. After a few seconds, he turned his head slightly like he was listening, then slowly walked toward the back fence. He disappeared into the shadows near where the fence met the far corner. I closed the window, locked it, and stood there for a bit, trying to listen. Nothing. Just the hum of the highway again. I laid back down but couldn't fall asleep. My mind kept replaying the image of him standing there. I tried to tell myself maybe he was another driver checking his own rig, and just happened to look at mine. but the way he lingered didn't feel right. About 10 minutes later, another knock. Harder this time. 2 sharp raps that echoed in the quiet night. Then that same voice, closer. "Hey, you should check your lights." That made my stomach tighten. I sat up fast and looked out again. This time, he was standing right next to my cab door on the driver's side. Still couldn't see his face clearly. Just the shape of the hood, hands hanging at his sides. He wasn't moving, wasn't knocking again. Just standing there facing the door like he was waiting for me to open it. Something about the stillness made it worse. I grabbed my phone and called the front desk. The woman from earlier answered, her voice sleepy. I told her someone was outside, knocking on my truck and saying my lights were on. She said she hadn't seen anyone out there, and that the lot was empty except for me and one other guest. She said she'd call security, though I doubted the place even had one, and told me to stay inside. I thanked her and hung up. I watched from the window. When I looked again, the man was gone, just like that. No sound of footsteps, no door closing. He was just gone. I kept the light off and stared at the parking lot for a long time. Eventually, I got too tired and sat back down on the bed, half-dressed, waiting to hear another knock. But nothing came after that. Sometime near dawn, I drifted off again. When I woke up, the sunlight was already filling the room. The air conditioner had finally cooled the place a bit. I packed up, brushed my teeth, and headed downstairs. I decided to check the rig before checking out, partly because I wanted to make sure the lights weren't actually on, but mostly because I wanted to see if anything looked off. From a distance, everything looked normal. The street lamp was still buzzing. The dust from the lot kicked up a little by the morning breeze. But as I walked closer, I saw it. The fence behind my truck had been cut. Not just bent, but sliced open. The hole was right behind where my sleeper window sat. The metal links had been clipped and pushed outward, like someone had crawled through from the other side. The dirt below it was disturbed. Footprints, maybe 2 sets, though hard to tell in the loose sand. They led right up to the back tires, then disappeared in the gravel. That's when I noticed the door. Around the handle of my cab, there were fresh scratches. Long, thin marks like someone had been trying to pry it open with a screwdriver or knife. The paint was chipped around the lock. I ran my hand over it and felt the edges, still rough. It hadn't been there before. I checked the trailer latch and it was fine, still sealed. But the cab door had definitely been tampered with. Whoever that man was, he hadn't been there to help. I walked the fence line a bit more. On the other side, it dropped off into a patch of sand and brush that stretched toward a set of abandoned warehouses a few hundred yards out. You could get to them easily from a side road. It would have been a perfect way for someone to sneak up behind the lot without anyone noticing. I went back to the office to mention it. The woman at the desk looked surprised but not shocked. Said they'd had people come through before, trying to break into parked vehicles, looking for stuff to steal. She said she'd tell the owner and call someone to look at the fence. That was it. No apology, no concern, just another day for them. I didn't blame her. That place probably saw its share of weird things. I checked everything inside my cab. Nothing missing. Nothing moved. But the idea that someone had been that close while I was sleeping made me uneasy. The fact that he'd knocked, spoken, and waited meant he was testing if I was awake. He must have stood there, listening for movement, maybe deciding whether to try the door again. If I hadn't looked out, maybe he would have tried harder. I took one last look at the fence before I pulled out. The sunlight made the cut edges of the wire shine like little silver blades. The air was already heating up, the horizon shimmering over the desert. As I rolled out onto the road, I glanced in my mirror at the motel. Small, sun-bleached, sitting there like it had 100 nights before. You'd never guess anything had happened there. That whole drive to Vegas, I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see that man's hoodie somewhere behind me. Never did. But that feeling, knowing someone was outside your cab in the middle of the night close enough to touch the door, that stuck with me. I've parked at a lot of motels and rest stops since, but I always check the fence lines now. I always back up against a wall or another rig. Because out there, especially in those small desert towns, sometimes the dark isn't empty. It's just quiet enough for someone to stand in it and wait. Highway 93 at night is one of those roads that makes you question how far civilization really reaches. It's a long black ribbon cutting through open desert, the kind of place where your headlights only reach as far as they have to, and beyond that is nothing, just darkness and silence. I was running south from Ely to Pioche that night, hauling mining equipment on a flatbed, heavy load, slow drive, and the kind of quiet that gets under your skin after a few hours. August 2016, hot even after midnight, the kind of dry heat that never really lets go of you. My truck's dashboard lights were the only glow inside the cab. Everything else outside was pitch black. No cell reception for long stretches out there. No lights from houses. No other vehicles most of the time. Just the hum of the tires and the low growl of the engine echoing off the nothing. Every once in a while I'd glance at the GPS mounted to the dash, but around mile marker 100 or so it started flickering. A little glitch here and there, then it froze and threw up a no signal message. The cell bars on my phone dropped right after. Typical out there, but still. It added to the emptiness of it all. It's funny how when you're that isolated, your brain starts trying to find comfort in patterns, mile markers, road signs, any sign of another living thing. Around mile 112, I spotted a pair of taillights up ahead far in the distance. Just two small red dots cutting through the black. It was strange how much relief I felt just seeing them. Another vehicle meant someone else was out there. I started closing the gap slowly, keeping my pace steady because my load was heavy, and the road wasn't forgiving if you got too quick with it. I followed those taillights for a few minutes, maybe 5, maybe a little more. The road was straight for a while, so I could see them clearly the whole time, but something about them started to look off. The spacing between them wasn't changing, and neither was their position on the road. Usually you can tell if you're gaining or falling behind by how those lights move slightly against the dark, but these didn't. They were completely still. I slowed a little and squinted, realizing the truck ahead wasn't moving at all. Just sitting there, dead center in the lane. I eased off the throttle, flicked my brights on, and that's when I saw it clearly. It was a white pickup, older model, maybe late 90s, sitting perfectly straight on the center line. Both doors were wide open. The engine was still running, exhaust puffing faintly in the glow of my headlights. That's the kind of thing that gets your heart moving a bit faster. You see an empty vehicle in the middle of nowhere with the engine on, you know something's not right. I slowed to a crawl and stopped about 30 feet behind it, hit my hazards and sat there for a few seconds just watching. The desert was completely silent except for the soft idle of the pickup and the ticking of my own engine. I got out because that's what you do. Truckers help other drivers. Maybe the guy had car trouble or he got sick or something else happened. The air outside was warm but still. I stepped down onto the asphalt, the sound of gravel crunching faintly under my boots. My headlights stretched across the empty pickup and a little beyond it into the desert brush. But there was nothing, no movement, no shapes. Just dry weeds and sand. I called out, but my voice didn't travel far. It just got eaten by the open air. I walked closer, checking the cab of the pickup. Both doors were open, like someone had left in a hurry. The seats were empty. The keys were still in the ignition. A half-full bottle of water sat in the cup holder. I noticed a pair of sunglasses lying on the driver's seat and a paper map folded on the dash. The weird thing was, the truck was in gear. I could hear the faint rumble and see the talk needle barely moving. That didn't make sense. Nobody leaves their vehicle running like that, doors open, middle of the lane. I turned around slowly, looking at the desert around me. The silence felt thick like it was pressing in. That's when I heard it. Gravel crunching behind my trailer. Slow, steady steps. Not fast, not running, just one step, then another, like someone walking around the back end of my rig. It's the kind of sound you don't mistake when you've spent enough time around trucks. You can tell the difference between wind moving something and actual footsteps. This was footsteps. I froze where I was. The sound kept moving, crunching around toward the driver's side of my truck. I turned my flashlight on, swept it toward the sound, but all I saw was empty ground. My tires and the shimmer of dust in the beam. My stomach felt like it dropped. The sound stopped right near my driver's door, like whoever or whatever it was had just stopped there. I called out again, louder this time, but my voice cracked a little. Nothing came back. Not even an echo. Just silence. I stood there for maybe 5 seconds that felt like an hour, trying to decide whether to move or not. Then instinct kicked in. I turned, walked fast back toward my cab, climbed up and slammed the door. My hands were shaking when I hit the lock switch. I didn't wait to think it over. I shifted into gear, eased around the pickup as carefully as I could without clipping it, and rolled back onto the road. My mirrors were full of the reflection of my own lights for a few seconds. Then the pickup disappeared into the black behind me. My heart was pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my ears. I kept glancing at the mirrors anyway, half expecting to see someone step out onto the highway. Nothing did. For the next few miles, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every sound in the cab felt louder. Every shadow looked wrong. I didn't see another vehicle for nearly 40 minutes. Not until I was closer to Pioche. When I finally hit a stretch with cell service again, I called it in to the Nevada Highway Patrol, gave them the mile marker, description, everything. They said they'd send a unit out to check. By the time I made it to my drop yard the next morning, the whole thing felt like a bad dream. I unloaded, got some coffee, and tried to brush it off. Later that afternoon, I got a call back from the patrol office. The trooper told me they'd found the pickup right where I said it would be, stripped clean. Doors still open, engine dead, interior gutted. Then he said something that made my skin crawl. That same truck, same plate had been reported before. 3 years earlier, 2013. Same spot on Highway 93. Same setup, engine running, doors open, nobody inside. Back then, they'd had reports of it being stolen from a lot in Ely, then showing up abandoned. No leads, no suspects. They towed it, paperwork got buried, case closed. The trooper didn't have much else to say. Just thanked me for calling it in and said they'd handle it. I hung up and sat there in the cab for a long time, just staring out the windshield at nothing. I drove that stretch again a few months later, middle of the day this time. Sun high, desert blazing bright. I slowed down near mile 112 without meaning to, looking for anything out of place. The asphalt looked the same. Empty road, same endless stretch of desert, same silence. What sticks with me isn't what I saw. It's what I didn't. Those footsteps. The way they stopped right at my door like someone was standing there waiting. Whoever was out there that night, they were real, flesh and blood. And for some reason, they wanted me to stop. Every time I pass through that stretch now, I keep my CB on, my doors locked, and my speed steady. I don't stop for taillights anymore, not out there. On Highway 93, once the night swallows you, it's just you and whatever decides to step out of the dark. I was hauling a load of frozen beef eastbound on I-80, heading out of Rawlins toward Cheyenne, in the middle of one of those Wyoming winter storms that makes you question every decision you've ever made. February 2018. I'd been driving since early afternoon, and by the time I hit Laramie, the wind was hammering the trailer so hard, it felt like the whole rig might tip on some of the open stretches. Snow came in waves, blowing sideways, visibility down to maybe 50 feet at best. I could feel the road under me turning slick, that faint delayed response in the steering when you correct, and it takes a second to bite. I knew I couldn't push it much further. When I saw the sign for Rest Area 217, just west of Laramie, I took the exit. The lot was completely empty. Not another set of headlights, not even a snowplow. Just white swirling under the sodium lights and the sound of wind howling across the open plains. I pulled in, parked on the far side facing the exit ramp so I could roll out easy in the morning. Set the brakes, shut down, and just sat there for a minute listening to the wind beat against the cab. It was strong enough that the truck rocked slightly, that low groan through the sleeper walls like the metal was sighing. I logged my hours, sent in the check-in, and crawled into the sleeper. The temperature outside was in the low teens, but with the wind chill, it had to be close to zero. I ran the bunk heater and wrapped myself in my sleeping bag. Out there in the dark, with no lights except the orange glow from the rest area lamps barely visible through the frost on the windows. It felt like being parked at the edge of the world. I must have fallen asleep around 11. The wind didn't stop all night. It whistled, sometimes rising to a pitch that made the mirrors tremble. I woke up once around 1 when the cab shifted from a particularly strong gust, but I drifted back off. Then sometime after 2 in the morning I heard it, a dull, heavy banging. It took me a second to realize it wasn't the wind or something loose on the trailer. It was sharp, deliberate, spaced out, someone knocking. For a few seconds I just lay there, disoriented, staring at the dark ceiling of the sleeper. Then it came again. 3 hard knocks against the side window right next to my head. The kind of sound that makes your pulse jump instantly. I sat up, grabbed my flashlight from the cubby, and slid the curtain open just enough to peek through. My breath fogged the glass. The window was already crusted with snow from the wind, but I could see a figure standing there. A man. Heavy coat, hood up, face pale in the reflection of my flashlight. His coat looked soaked, like he'd been walking through wet snow for a while. My first thought was he'd slid off the road, or maybe was another trucker whose rig had died. I cracked the window open just an inch, enough for my voice to carry over the wind. I asked if he was all right, if he needed help. He didn't move closer, just said something about his car being dead down the access road and needing a jump. That made sense at the time. People get stranded in this kind of weather all the time out there. I told him to give me a second, that I'd grab my jacket and come out to help. I shut the curtain, pulled on my boots and coat and opened the door. The wind hit me like a wall, cold, dry, cutting through my clothes. I had to squint against the snow whipping sideways. I stepped down from the cab, flashlight beam cutting through the white. There was no one there. I thought maybe he'd gone back toward the access road, but there weren't any footprints, just the same smooth layer of snow covering everything. The only marks being the ones from my own boots when I'd parked earlier that night. I turned a full circle, shining the light across the lot, past the picnic tables half buried in drifts, past the restroom building, across the entrance and exit ramps. Nothing. It didn't make sense. There was nowhere to go, just open land, fences, and snow stretching to the dark horizon. I stood there listening, trying to hear over the wind. No engine, no crunch of footsteps, no movement at all. For a few minutes I tried to reason it out. Maybe I'd imagined him. Maybe I'd seen my own reflection in the glass, half asleep and spooked by the storm. But the knocking had been real. Solid. You don't mistake that sound when it's right next to your head. I started walking toward the small access road that ran along the side of the rest area, just to be sure. The snow was blowing so hard that every few seconds my flashlight beam turned into a white blur. I kept scanning the ground for tracks, for any sign of a vehicle's tire marks. There was nothing, not a single indentation. The snow was smooth and untouched. I went maybe 100 yards down the access road before the wind picked up even harder, and I decided it wasn't worth freezing over. My fingers were already going numb, and I couldn't feel my nose. I turned back, followed my own tracks to the truck, climbed in, and shut the door. My face burned from the temperature change. I sat there in the dark for a while, listening to the wind push against the cab. The knocking never came back. Eventually, I fell back asleep, uneasy but too tired to stay awake. When morning came, the wind had calmed a little, though the world outside was covered in a thick layer of white. Sunlight broke through thin clouds, turning everything a blinding silver. I stepped out again, stretched my legs, and decided to grab some coffee from the vending machines inside the rest area building. There was a Dodge pickup parked near the entrance, the first vehicle I'd seen since the night before. The man inside was scraping ice off his windshield. I walked over, told him I'd parked there through the storm, and mentioned what had happened. He looked at me for a second, then asked, "Which access road?" I pointed to the small, snow-covered track running along the east side of the lot. He frowned and said that road had been closed for years. Since 2013, he said. It used to connect to an old frontage route, but a car wrecked at the end of it one winter. A bad one. They shut it down after that and never reopened it. The wreck was still there, he told me, half buried now. Driver had frozen to death after walking toward the highway for help during a storm just like this one. He said it casually, like he'd told the story before, then went back to cleaning his truck. I didn't say anything after that. I just stood there for a minute staring out at that snow-covered road, the same one I'd walked partway down last night, where I hadn't seen a single mark or shadow. When I finally climbed back into my rig, I sat for a while before starting the engine. The bunk window was still frosted, the same one that had been knocked on. I looked at it half expecting to see something, a print, a smudge, anything, but there was only ice. Just frozen crystals catching the morning light. I drove out not long after, easing the truck back onto I-80. The snowplows had cleared most of the lanes, and the sky was starting to open up, pale blue stretching over the white fields. In the mirrors, the rest area disappeared behind a swirl of wind-blown snow. I told myself I'd just been tired, that maybe it was the sound of ice shifting or something in the wind that fooled me. But I kept thinking about how real the knocking had sounded, how clear the man's shape had been under that light, and mostly, how there hadn't been a single footprint. By the time I reached Cheyenne, the storm had passed completely. The sky was clear, the sun bright against the snow, and everything looked normal again. But even now, years later, every time I pull into a rest area in the middle of winter and the wind starts to rock the cab, I can still hear that sound. 3 hard knocks against the window, and I always look before I sleep. I was hauling a load of lettuce and tomatoes from Barstow to Albuquerque, running I-40 eastbound through the Arizona desert. It was the middle of March 2019. A cold, dry night. I'd been driving since just after 8 p.m., and by the time I hit the stretch about 40 miles west of Flagstaff, it was around 2:30 in the morning. That hour on the road always feels strange. The world kind of empties out. You go long stretches without seeing headlights, just the hum of your rig and the white lines sliding under you. The CB was dead silent, and the sky was a washed-out kind of black. A thin strip of stars stretching above the desert. The air outside looked cold. My dash said 33 degrees. The desert wind had that dry, biting edge to it. I had the heater going low, the cab faintly warm, the radio tuned to a low country station that kept cutting in and out from static. It was one of those stretches where you start zoning a little, watching the road but also half daydreaming. Your brain running on autopilot. Then I saw her. She was standing on the right shoulder, maybe 50 yards ahead when I first caught her in the beams. A woman. Still as a post facing the highway, the wind pushing her hair sideways across her face. At first I thought maybe she was in trouble. Maybe her car had broken down, or she'd been walking and needed help. But there wasn't a single vehicle around. No flashers, no hazard lights, no glow of headlights fading off anywhere. Just her standing there in that pale washed-out glow of my high beams. I slowed instinctively, dropped the rig from cruise, tapped the brakes, eased her down. The trailer rattled softly behind me. I remember the way the light washed over the road sign ahead. Flagstaff 40 miles, and the faint squeal of the brakes cutting through the wind. The woman didn't move. She didn't turn toward me or raise her arms or anything. Just stood there facing me, motionless, like she was waiting for something to happen. I coasted to a stop maybe 50 yards past her and flicked on the hazards. The blinking orange light reflected weakly off the side of the trailer. My mind was still half caught between concern and unease. I didn't want to ignore someone who might be stranded out here. That's the kind of thing that sticks with you, if you find out later someone froze to death a few miles from help. So I grabbed my flashlight, stepped out of the cab, and walked back along the shoulder. The wind hit immediately. Cold, dry, sharp against the face. The desert at night has this silence that almost hums. Not quite quiet, just filled with the sound of air moving over open land. My boots crunched gravel, each step making this clear, lonely sound that seemed to travel for miles. The headlights cast a weak halo behind me, but after about 30 feet, it all went dark except for the beam from my flashlight. When I got to where she should have been, there was nothing. just the wide, empty shoulder sloping into scrub grass and dirt. I swept the light around. No movement. No tracks. Nothing caught in the beam but dust drifting and the faint glint of tiny rocks. I even crouched, checked for footprints. But the wind had already swept everything smooth. The highway was empty in both directions. No car lights, no sound of engines. Just the long, empty desert breathing cold air across the asphalt. I stood there for maybe a minute, sweeping my light back and forth, feeling that weird pressure in my chest. That feeling when something doesn't add up and you can't explain it. I finally shook my head, turned, and started back toward the truck. When I climbed into the cab, I shut the door and sat for a second, listening to the faint rattle of the wind against the mirrors. I remember glancing up at the dash cam screen. I keep one mounted just above the center console. Records the road and the rear view off the trailer. The screen had this faint static flicker, just enough to catch my eye. Then it froze. For about half a second, a single frame stuck on the display. It was the rear camera feed, the back of the trailer lit by my hazards. And she was there, standing right behind the trailer, looking up toward the camera. Same hair blowing sideways across her face, same stillness. Then the feed cut out, just black. I reached up and tapped the screen. It didn't come back. The power light was still on, but the image was gone. I don't scare easily. You can't in this line of work. But I could feel my pulse in my ears. I pulled the shifter into gear and got moving again, faster than I meant to. The next 20 miles felt longer than the entire trip from Barstow. I kept checking my mirrors even though I knew it was pointless. The red blink of the hazard reflection was gone, replaced by the dim, bouncing lights of the trailer doors. Every time I hit a small hill, I expected to see someone walking along the shoulder in my mirror. But there was nothing. Just desert and wind. When I finally rolled into Flagstaff, I pulled straight into the Little America truck stop. It was about 3 in the morning. I parked under the lights near the fuel island, killed the engine, and just sat there for a minute with the heater blowing. My hands were shaking a little. I went inside to grab coffee and calm down. The guy at the counter noticed something was off. I told him I'd had a weird thing happen on the road. Didn't give details, just that I thought I saw someone, and wanted to make sure nothing was wrong with my dash cam. He said they had security footage covering the lot, and could let me check the timestamp when I'd pulled in. We went to the back office. They pulled up the footage. I watched myself pull over on the side of I-40, get out, walk back. Then maybe 30 seconds later, I came running back toward the cab, fast, like I was being chased. But in the footage, there was no one behind me. No person on the shoulder, no movement, nothing in the frame. Just me, sprinting like hell in the middle of the night. The security guy looked at me sideways like he wanted to ask questions but didn't want to get involved. I didn't explain it because I didn't even know what to explain. I left the office, filled my thermos, and sat in the cab for a long time before I got back on the road. When daylight came, I checked the dash cam again. The rear camera feed had come back perfectly normal. I went through the footage from the night before. It showed everything except that one stop. From the moment before I slowed to when I started driving again, the footage was corrupted. Just black. That trip stuck with me for a long time. I told myself it could have been a trick of the light, or maybe someone walking who ducked off into the desert before I got to them. Maybe I was tired and my eyes played a trick on me. I'd been running long hours after all. But what bothered me most wasn't the missing footage. It was how real it all felt. The wind, the cold, the stillness. The way she just stood there like she knew I'd have to slow down. I've driven that stretch a dozen times since. I've never seen anything like it again. But every time I pass that area, about 40 miles west of Flagstaff, near an old green mile marker half buried in the brush, I feel that same tightness in my chest. I always glance at the shoulder, even if I tell myself not to. And no matter how tired I am, I never pull over on that stretch again. Not for anything. It was October 2021, somewhere around midnight, and I was heading south on I-55, hauling a load of canned goods from Chicago down toward Memphis. The night was cool, One of those damp Illinois nights when the air feels heavy, and the fog hovers just above the road. My headlights cut through it in short white tunnels. Every few seconds the fog swallowed the light again, and the darkness returned, swallowing the lines on the asphalt, until it felt like I was driving through nothing at all. I had the CB on channel 19 like always. It's just habit. A lot of guys don't bother anymore, but I've been driving since the 90s, and I like the company. You never know when someone might warn you about a wreck or a trooper sitting in the median. Most nights it's quiet except for a few drivers trading jokes or weather updates. That night though, the static started crackling a little different. It was just past the Raymond exit when a voice came through, cutting sharp through the static. Breaker 19. Anyone else hearing that crying? It startled me a little. The voice was rough, deep, sounded like a man in his 40s maybe, the kind of tone that made it clear he wasn't joking. Then a blast of static swallowed the rest. Another voice came on after a few seconds, a younger guy. Ain't funny, man. Then silence again. I remember gripping the wheel tighter. Something about the way the first guy spoke didn't sound like he was messing around. You could hear a tremor in his voice, something uneasy. Then the first guy came back, but quieter. It's in my sleeper. Sounds like a kid. I'll admit that made the hair on my arms rise. Out there, middle of the night. Nothing but fog and highway and a voice saying there's a kid crying inside his truck. I listened close, waiting for more, thinking maybe he was parked somewhere near one of the rest stops. A few other drivers chimed in, voices overlapping, but the static made it hard to catch all of it. Most of it was disbelief. Some laughter. Someone asked if he'd been drinking. Then silence again, thick and long, like everyone was just waiting for him to talk again. 5 minutes passed. I kept scanning the road ahead, headlights flashing off the reflective posts, trying not to think about it. Then his voice came back, weaker this time. Barely above the hiss of the radio. It's outside now. That was it. Right after that, another guy tried to laugh it off, and his radio squealed so loud it blew through my cab, a high-pitched screech that made me flinch and turn the volume down. When it cleared, both voices were gone. Dead air. Just the steady hum of static. I sat there behind the wheel, driving through the fog, feeling my chest get tight. I told myself it was probably some prank. Maybe a couple drivers messing around on the frequency. Maybe someone running an audio clip through their rig. You hear all kinds of things on CB. Preachers, pranksters, even weird pirate radio stations that bleed in. But something about the silence after that last transmission didn't feel like a joke. I drove another hour before I pulled into a rest area near Litchfield to catch a nap. The lot was half full. A few reefers humming, diesel engines idling, the kind of quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat. I parked along the edge near the trees, killed the lights, and sat for a while before shutting down the engine. Normally I'd crawl into the sleeper and be out within minutes. But that night I couldn't shake that voice. It's in my sleeper. I kept replaying it in my head, thinking about how sure he'd sounded. You could hear movement behind him, like fabric shifting or maybe the sound of a curtain being pulled. It didn't sound staged. It sounded like he was trying not to panic. I didn't sleep much. Every creak of the truck made me sit up. At one point around 2 a.m., I swore I heard a faint tapping on my passenger side door. It could have been the wind or maybe just the metal cooling, but I didn't check. I just sat there in the dark with the dome light off, staring out the windshield, waiting for morning. When the sun finally came up, the fog was gone. The parking lot looked normal again. I got some coffee from the vending machine and went inside to use the restroom. A couple of other drivers were talking near the counter. Nothing strange, just the usual talk about loads and weather. No mention of what had happened on the radio. I figured maybe it really was just some idiot playing a recording. I brushed it off, climbed back in the cab, and got moving again. About 10 miles south of Litchfield, I hit traffic. Flashing lights ahead. A semi had jackknifed across the southbound lanes during the night. The police had one lane open, but the wreck looked bad. The trailer was on its side, split open like a crushed can. The cab was almost unrecognizable. I slowed as I passed, taking in the scene. Firefighters, a wrecker truck, a coroner's van. One of the state troopers waved us through slowly. As I rolled by, I saw what was left of the cab door. The paint was blackened and scraped, but you could still make out letters painted in white. Blackbird, that hit me hard. I knew that name. It was one of the handles from the radio the night before. The man who said he heard the crying. The realization sat heavy in my stomach. I drove in silence for the next hour. CB turned off. Couldn't bring myself to listen anymore. Later that morning, when I stopped at a Pilot for fuel, the TV inside was playing the local news. The anchor was talking about a fatal accident overnight near Litchfield. Single vehicle, driver pronounced dead at the scene. No name released, just that one word again, Blackbird. They said the driver lost control and crossed both lanes before overturning. Investigators weren't sure what caused it. No skid marks, no sign of braking, just sudden loss of control. I went back to my truck and sat there for a long while before pulling out. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd heard. Maybe he'd fallen asleep. Maybe he'd been talking himself into a panic, imagining things in the dark. When you spend enough nights alone on the road, your mind starts to twist things. The hum of the tires, the hiss of the wind through the mirror brackets, the way the sleeper walls creak when the temperature drops. It can all sound like something else if you're tired enough. Still, I couldn't shake the timing. The way the radio went dead right after he said it was outside. The way nobody ever came back on the channel after that. I drove that same stretch of I-55 again a few weeks later, another run southbound. By then the weather had turned colder, and most of the trees along the highway were bare. I passed the spot near the mile marker where the wreck had been. There was still a dark stain on the pavement, and some broken guardrail that hadn't been replaced yet. Someone had left a small cross stuck in the ground with a few fake flowers tied to it. I slowed down for a moment, just looking at it. Couldn't help but picture the guy in his cab that night, hearing something he couldn't explain, maybe panicking, maybe trying to see where the sound was coming from. One bad move on that highway and that's all it takes. After that trip, I stopped leaving the CB on all night. I still use it for traffic, still check in with other drivers now and then. But once I park for the night, I shut it off. The silence feels better. Every once in a while, when I'm driving through a foggy patch around midnight and the static starts hissing faintly in the background, I think about that voice. The way it cracked a little when he said the crying was inside his sleeper. I don't know what he heard. Maybe it was just a dream. Maybe some noise that got stuck in his head while he was half asleep. Maybe it was nothing at all. But the sound of that last transmission, "It's outside now," still crawls through my mind every time I take that stretch of highway, and every time I pass that mile marker south of Springfield. I can't help glancing at the shoulder, half expecting to see a black cab parked in the fog, CB antenna still swaying, waiting for someone to answer. I was hauling empty milk crates back to Dallas that night, running east along US 60. It was July 2022, middle of summer, but the plains east of Amarillo always got cool after dark. The run was easy, light trailer, steady road, quiet night. I'd started around sunset, hoping to make Dallas before dawn. The road out that way was mostly flat, long stretches of asphalt cutting through fields and old fences. Nothing but the steady hum of the tires and the faint whistle of wind through the side mirror. Around 11 p.m., I stopped at a Love's Off exit 74 to grab coffee and stretch my legs. The place was half empty, a few rigs idling, the smell of diesel hanging in the air. I walked inside, got a large black coffee, a bottle of water, and a bag of peanuts for later. I remember the girl at the counter looked half asleep. She handed me the receipt without even looking up. Outside, I walked around the truck once, checking the straps and seals. Everything was fine. The metal floor of the trailer was clean, the latches tight. I tapped the tires with my iron bar out of habit, listened to the hollow sound. Everything was good. When I got back on the highway, traffic had thinned out completely. Just me and the occasional set of headlights far behind. The sky was cloudless, stars faintly visible between the dim orange glow of distant gas flares. The road shimmered ahead in the heat haze left over from the day, even though the air had cooled down. The hum of the tires became a kind of white noise that made my eyelids heavy. I rolled down the window for some air and turned on the cab light just long enough to check my logbook. About 2 hours later, near Pampa, I started hearing something in the trailer. It was faint at first, just a soft shifting sound like something sliding. I thought maybe it was the crates, though they were stacked tight, empty and light. Then I heard it again, a dull thud, then another. It wasn't rhythmic, more like someone moving around back there. I eased off the gas, turned off the radio, and listened. The sound came again, one heavy shift, then silence. I figured maybe a strap had come loose or the floor plate flexed from the wind. Still, it didn't feel right. I pulled onto the shoulder, hazard lights blinking in the darkness. The highway was dead quiet. No cars, no movement, just the wind brushing against the side of the trailer. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped out, and felt the crunch of gravel under my boots. The air smelled like dry grass and hot asphalt cooling after a long day. I unlatched the back door, raised it, and climbed halfway up the bumper. I shined my light inside. Everything looked the same. The stacks of plastic milk crates strapped and lined up just how I'd loaded them. But when I swept the light toward the front of the trailer, I froze. The beam caught a rough, jagged square in the metal floor. A hole, about 2 feet by 2, cut from underneath. The edges were sharp and bent upward, like someone had forced it open from below. For a few seconds, I didn't move. I just stared, trying to make sense of it. Then my light hit something else. 2 duffel bags sitting near the hole. One of them was half open, and inside were bundles of cash wrapped in clear plastic, stacked tight. The edges of the bills looked old, maybe hundreds, maybe 20s. It was hard to tell. My first thought was drugs or some kind of drop gone wrong. I climbed down fast, shut the door, and locked it. My hands were shaking. I got back in the cab and locked both doors, heart hammering in my chest. I called 911 and told the dispatcher what I'd found. She sounded calm, told me to stay on the line, drive to the nearest station, and not stop for anyone. I told her I was about 10 miles out of Pampa heading east. She said to keep going toward Canadian Texas, that a sheriff's unit would meet me there. I pulled back onto the road, keeping my eyes on the mirrors. The highway stretched empty behind me, black and endless. I tried to keep my speed steady, but every bump made me think someone was still back there, crawling around in the dark. 10 minutes later, my headlights caught the faint reflection of something behind me, a pair of lights far off, coming fast. I thought it was another truck at first, but then I realized there were no headlights. Just 2 faint, dull glows, no running lights, no cab lights, nothing. A pickup, black or dark gray, closing the distance quick. The dispatcher was still on the line. I told her about the truck. She said again not to stop, that deputies were setting up ahead. The pickup was maybe 200 yards back now, still no lights, just a low shadow moving fast. I pressed harder on the pedal. My rig wasn't heavy, so it picked up speed quick, but the pickup stayed close, maybe 30 yards behind. I could see its outline now. Big front grille, lifted body, maybe an older Chevy or Dodge. I couldn't tell for sure. It stayed behind me for miles. No honking, no flashing lights, no signals, just following. I remember how my palms were slick with sweat, gripping the wheel so tight my fingers ached. I kept glancing between the road and the mirrors, every second expecting it to pull up alongside. I could see no faces inside, just dark glass. The dispatcher kept talking, calm but firm, saying the deputies were waiting outside Canadian. I passed one small town, maybe Miami, Texas, and the pickup stayed right behind me. Maybe 20 yards now. The road curved slightly, and I thought about hitting the shoulder and swinging the trailer to block the lane, but I didn't dare slow down. I figured whoever was behind me wanted the bags, and they knew what was in them. Finally, after what felt like forever, I saw the flashing red and blue lights ahead. 2 sheriff's units parked at a turnout, blocking part of the lane. I eased down, staying in my lane. The pickup suddenly slowed, then braked hard. By the time I pulled in beside the deputies, the road behind me was empty again. The pickup had turned off somewhere before the lights. The deputies told me to shut the truck down and step out. They went around to the trailer with flashlights, guns drawn. I stood by the cab, watching their lights bounce inside. When they opened the doors, I climbed up behind them. The hole in the floor was gone. I don't mean it was repaired neatly. It looked like it had never been there. The floor was smooth, uncut, with only faint scratches near the front corner. The duffel bags were gone too. Just empty crates and the faint smell of oil or metal shavings. One of the deputies crawled underneath the trailer, checked the undercarriage, came back shaking his head. Nothing there. No sign of a patch, no marks, nothing. I kept trying to explain what I'd seen. The jagged cut, the cash, the bags, but they just looked at each other. They checked the trailer again, checked the seals I'd placed at the last stop. Still intact. The dispatcher record showed my call, the time, the report. Everything lined up, except the evidence. They told me to park overnight at the station lot in Canadian and wait until morning for a full inspection. I barely slept. Every sound outside made me jump. The hiss of air brakes, the rumble of engines pulling through. When I finally got out of the cab at dawn, the trailer was cold, quiet, and looked untouched. Later that morning, a pair of state investigators went through it again. They ran a magnet under the floor, checked for weld marks, even pulled part of the plating up near where I'd said the hole was. Nothing. The floor had never been cut. They found no traces of plastic, oil, or any duffel bag fibers. After a few hours, they told me I could go. They didn't say much else, just that sometimes drivers get tired, see things. Imagine sounds from the trailer. I didn't argue. I signed the statement and left. Driving back toward Dallas that afternoon, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been inside that trailer. I know what I saw. I remember the torn metal edges, the light hitting the bundles of cash, the smell of hot rubber and fuel when I climbed down. I still hear the sound sometimes, that dull shifting from inside the box behind me. A week later, the company mechanic checked the trailer during a regular inspection. He said one of the underside crossbeams had fresh welding marks, just a small square section that didn't match the factory welds. Looked new, he said, like someone had cut it out and put it back recently. No one ever explained who did it or how those bags vanished. I never saw that black pickup again. I stopped hauling nights for a while after that. But sometimes when the road's quiet and the wind dies down, I swear I can still hear something shift behind me, like someone moving under the floor, waiting for the next stop. It was May 2020, around 3:45 in the morning, somewhere just outside Nashville. I had been driving most of the night, hauling a light load eastbound on I-24, headed toward Chattanooga. I pulled into the Flying J off exit 62 to top off before dawn. The lot was quiet, almost empty. The kind of early morning quiet where everything feels suspended, like the world hasn't woken up yet. A few trucks idled in the back row, faint hums of engines mixing with the occasional hiss of air brakes. The store lights glowed dull yellow against the dark. I pulled up to pump 3. The station canopy lights flickered once as I killed the engine. The air smelled like wet diesel and burnt coffee. A low layer of fog hung over the lot, clinging to the asphalt in patches, and my headlights cut through it when I stepped down from the cab. The place felt still. No wind, no sound except the faint hum from the building and the slosh of fuel in my tank as I started filling. I had been running long hauls through the early days of the pandemic. Roads were emptier than I'd ever seen. That night it was like the whole world had gone to sleep. As I was watching the numbers climb on the pump display, I noticed someone standing over by pump 4. Older guy, maybe late 50s or early 60s, gray stubble, weathered face, wearing an orange reflective vest over a faded plaid shirt. His jeans were torn at the knees and he had on old dirty sneakers. No truck near him. No car either. Just him standing by the pump, hands in his pockets, head tilted slightly down. I gave him a nod. He nodded back once. Then he just stayed there staring. Not moving, not doing anything, not even checking the pump. Just standing there like he was waiting for something. I figured maybe he worked maintenance for the station or was on break. But something about him looked off. He didn't look like a worker. No logo on the vest, no badge, no gloves, nothing. Just that blank stare. I watched him for maybe a minute while my tank filled. He didn't move once. Started to feel uncomfortable. That quiet kind of unease that builds in your gut when something doesn't make sense. I tried not to make a big deal out of it. I finished fueling, locked the nozzle, and decided to go inside for coffee. The air inside the store was warm and smelled like cleaner and stale donuts. The clerk was behind the counter, head down, scrolling through his phone. I went to the coffee station, poured a cup, and leaned on the counter waiting for the caffeine smell to wake me up a little. When I went to pay, the clerk looked up. He asked, "You fueling at 3 or 4?" I said 3. He frowned like I'd said something strange. Then he said, "Okay, 4's out of service." I looked out through the window toward the pumps. The fog had gotten a little thicker. I could still see the glow from the canopy lights, but the far edge of the lot was fading into a gray blur. The man wasn't there anymore. When I walked back out, the air felt cooler, damp. My boots stuck slightly to the asphalt with each step. I glanced at pump 4 again. The man was gone, but the pump handle was swinging slowly, like it had just been used. It creaked on its hinge, swaying back and forth, diesel dripping from the nozzle and darkening a patch on the ground. I stood there for a second, watching it swing. I felt that same unease crawl back up my neck. It didn't make sense. If the pump was out of service, it shouldn't have been active. And there was no truck there. No fresh tire tracks, no sound of an engine pulling away. The guy hadn't walked past me, and there was nowhere to go except the store or the lot behind the fuel island. I looked around, scanning the lot. Just a couple of trucks parked under the far lights, engines idling slow and steady. The rest of the area was empty. I walked a few steps closer to pump 4. The pump's screen was dark, no numbers, no backlight. The handle kept swinging, and the smell of raw diesel was stronger now. The concrete was wet where it had dripped. I reached out and steadied the handle, hung it back up in place and stepped back. There was no sound except the quiet hiss of one of the idling rigs in the distance. I remember thinking maybe the guy had gone inside. But when I went back in for a refill on my coffee, the clerk was alone, same as before. I didn't bother asking. Something about the whole thing felt better left alone. I went back to my truck, climbed up, and sat there for a bit before pulling out. I checked my mirrors, looked around the lot again, and rolled back onto the highway. The rest of the night felt strange. I kept glancing at the mirrors like I expected to see someone following me, but there was no one. The interstate was empty for miles. The fog thinned out the farther east I got, but that uneasy feeling stuck around. It wasn't fear exactly, just confusion that wouldn't settle. Later that morning, after the sun came up, I got on the CB talking with another driver who'd been a few miles ahead of me most of the night. We were chatting about fuel prices and rest stops, nothing serious. I mentioned that I'd fueled at the Flying J outside Nashville, and I said something about a guy hanging around pump 4 looking out of place. The other driver came back with this low, steady voice. He said, "Flying J off 24, right? Don't mess with pump 4. I asked what he meant. He said a couple years back a driver got hit there. Walked right into traffic after fueling. Said the man was wearing an orange vest. They never fixed the pump. I didn't respond right away. I didn't want to sound like an idiot or spook myself more than I already was. I kept driving, hands tight on the wheel, thinking about the guy I saw standing there. The orange vest, the way he just stared, the empty space where his truck should have been. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was a station worker who came out early to check the pumps. Maybe he left while I was inside. Maybe the clerk was wrong, and the pump wasn't actually out of service. I told myself all of that, but the more I thought about it, the less it fit. The pump handle swinging like that didn't make sense if it hadn't been touched recently, and the smell of diesel on the ground wasn't old. It was fresh. When I stopped later that afternoon at a rest area in Monteagle, I walked around the rig, stretched my legs, and looked at my reflection in the side mirror. I remember the early sun hitting the chrome tanks and blinding me for a second. My shirt still smelled faintly of fuel. I couldn't shake that image of the man standing there, motionless in that heavy quiet before dawn. Truck stops all have their weird stories, people passing through at all hours, faces you only see once. I'd heard about plenty of bad things happening at them, fights, thefts, drivers getting jumped. But this felt different. It wasn't violent, just unsettling. Like I'd caught a glimpse of something that didn't belong anymore. That night I parked in Dalton, Georgia, at another truck stop, and walked the lot before turning in. I found myself glancing at each pump, checking for signs of someone just standing too still. Nothing. Just normal people fueling. Engines rumbling, headlights passing by on the highway. After that trip, I never fueled at that Flying J again. I passed it plenty of times. Always around the same hour, early morning, lights glowing under the fog. Each time I looked, I half expected to see that orange vest again by pump 4. Never did. But I still think about it every time I stop somewhere quiet before dawn. Because it wasn't the idea of a ghost that bothered me. It was the thought that maybe the man had been real. Someone lost, confused, stuck in some loop of habit. Maybe he'd worked there once, or maybe he'd been the driver who didn't see the headlights coming. Maybe I saw someone standing in the same spot he had, years apart, doing the same thing he did right before stepping into traffic. And maybe that pump was never fixed because the station owners just left it as it was. Maybe they didn't want to touch it. Maybe they didn't even know why it kept leaking. Every driver has a place they avoid. For me, it's that Flying J outside Nashville, the one with the quiet lot, and the out-of-service pump 4 that still smells faintly of diesel even when no one's around. It was November 2020, northern Montana. Cold enough that every breath turned white against the windshield. I'd been running the High Line for years, so I knew that stretch of US 2 like the back of my hand. Long, lonely 2-lane blacktop running flat through open country. With the occasional ghost town and gas station half a century past its prime. That night, a few of us were hauling west in loose convoy. Me, Dale, Russ, and Tim. 4 rigs stretched a few miles apart, all heading toward Shelby before splitting off. It was late, just past 10 p.m., and the highway was dead quiet except for our headlights and the hum of diesel engines echoing across the plains. Snow was patchy along the ditches, the kind that never really melts that time of year. The sky was moonless, and out there with no towns or houses for miles, the dark felt different, heavier, like it pressed against the glass. You could see your headlights stretch out for what felt like forever, then vanish into nothing. It was one of those drives where the world seemed stripped down to engine noise and road. We were keeping in touch on CB, mostly just small talk to stay awake. The road was slick in spots, black ice that caught the tires when you least expected it. I remember gripping the wheel, eyes fixed on the faint shimmer of ice under the high beams, when Dale's voice crackled through the radio. He sounded uneasy. "Anyone see that white pickup tailing me?" None of us did. I was a few miles ahead. Russ behind me somewhere near Havre, Tim even farther back. Dale was between us, the third in line. We figured maybe some rancher's kid fooling around, or someone heading the same direction. Happens sometimes. The High Line draws strange traffic at night. Oil field workers, drifters, people who don't want to be noticed. But Dale kept talking, saying the truck was staying right on him. High beams in his mirrors. He said it had been there for miles. We told him to keep rolling and meet us in Cut Bank like planned. Then, after a few minutes, the radio went dead quiet. No chatter, no static, nothing. At first, we thought he'd just switched channels or had a bad connection. Happens often in those parts. CB signal drops between the hills. I tried calling him a few times, but nothing. The wind had started picking up by then, and I could feel the cross gusts push against the trailer. I slowed down, watching for his headlights in the mirrors, expecting them to appear any second. They never did. When I reached Cut Bank, Russ was already parked at the truck stop. Tim pulled in 10 minutes later. The three of us sat there waiting for Dale's rig to come through. He was usually the most punctual of us. Never late, never off schedule. An hour went by. Then another. We started to worry. We tried calling his phone, no answer. Tried the company dispatcher. Nothing, just radio silence. It was bitter cold outside, maybe 15 degrees with the wind cutting straight through you. We stood there by the pumps, breath fogging, looking east down the highway. No headlights, no taillights, just empty roads stretching into darkness. Eventually, we decided to give him some time. Figured maybe he'd pulled over for a mechanical issue, or to let the pickup pass. Still, something felt wrong. By morning, we knew it wasn't normal. Dispatch hadn't heard from him. He hadn't checked in for fuel. His GPS tracker hadn't pinged since just past mile marker 126, a dead zone outside Browning. The police got involved after we reported him missing. 2 days later, they found his rig. They said it was sitting in a frozen field a few miles off US 2. Engine still idling, lights on, both doors open. The trailer was empty, completely cleaned out. No footprints, no tire tracks, no sign of struggle. No sign of Dale. Just his thermos on the dash and the driver's door swinging in the wind. The investigators showed us a still image from his dash cam. Last thing it recorded before cutting to static. It showed his headlights slowing on the shoulder. A white pickup stopped in front of him at an angle, blocking the road. You could see someone standing beside it, but the light glare made it impossible to see their face. The final frame before the video cut showed Dale reaching toward the camera, like he was about to grab something, and you could hear him start to say, "All right, buddy." "What do you—" Then the feed broke, that was it. No more footage. No answers, weeks passed. State police canvassed the whole area. Helicopters, drones, volunteer searchers, the works. They found tire impressions near where the rig was abandoned, but they didn't match any known make in their system. The trailer had been stripped of its load, about $50,000 worth of heavy electrical components bound for a mining site. The company was furious, of course, but all we cared about was Dale. We heard theories. Hijacking, maybe. Someone targeting truckers. That stretch of US 2 is notorious for how empty it is. There are spots where you won't see another vehicle for 30, 40 miles at night. If someone wanted to make a rig disappear, there's no better place. Still, it didn't add up. Dale was careful, former Marine, always armed, always kept his doors locked while driving. The fact that the cab doors were open made no sense unless he'd stopped willingly. A month later, I drove that route again. Couldn't avoid it, it's part of the job. November had turned to December. Snow deep along the shoulders. Nothing but white fields and gray sky. I passed the area where they found his truck. There was nothing there now, just a faint rut in the frozen grass where the rig's tires had sunk. I pulled over for a minute, turned off the engine, and listened. Wind howled across the plain, rattling through the power lines. It was the kind of quiet that seeps into you. You can feel how far you are from everything. I thought about how he must have felt slowing down for that pickup. Maybe he thought it was another driver needing help. That was Dale, he'd stop for anyone. Maybe the pickup flashed its hazards. Maybe someone waved him down. You can picture it clear. He steps out into the cold, breath hanging, asking what's wrong. Maybe a second vehicle rolls up behind him. 2 trucks, maybe more. Quick, quiet. They make him open the trailer. They take what they want. Maybe he argues. Maybe they panic. Then they're gone, taking him with them. Happens fast out there. No one to see, no cameras, no witnesses. Just darkness and the endless wind. The official report never said much. Possible theft, ongoing investigation. No suspects. No trace of Dale. His family had a memorial that winter. We went, all of us who'd been running that night. I remember standing by the framed photo of him. Same grin he always had, holding a coffee mug at some rest stop. They never found his body, just his cap later on, half buried in snow a mile from where the rig was. No footprints around it. Probably blown there by the wind, they said. After that, none of us liked driving that stretch at night. Even months later, I'd catch myself checking my mirrors more often than usual. Every time headlights appeared behind me, I'd watch them too closely, waiting to see if they'd get too close, wondering what I'd do if they didn't pass. By spring, I stopped running the High Line altogether. Took southern routes even if they paid less. Some nights I still think about that dash cam footage. How fast it ended. How sudden it felt. I think about Dale sitting there in the dark, seeing that white pickup pull up, not knowing that was the last moment anyone would ever see him. In the end, there wasn't any big mystery to solve. Just a man gone missing in the middle of nowhere. No ghosts, no curses, just something ugly and human. The kind of thing that happens when people with bad intentions cross paths with someone too decent to expect it. That's what sticks with me most. Not fear exactly, but the realization of how thin the line is between routine and disaster when you're out there alone. Every time I drive a lonely stretch now, I keep my doors locked, lights bright, radio low. If I see someone pulled over waving for help, I keep going. I'll call it in, but I won't stop. Not anymore. Not after that night on US 2, when one of our own slowed down for a white pickup and never made it home.